Welcome to Save As Ability, a podcast to educate and inform you about disability employment issues. My name is David D'Arcangelo, and I'm your disability policy expert. Hey everybody, it's great to be with you. David D'Arcangelo, Save As Ability. It's our inaugural podcast here. Hope to be doing several of these. Really what we're trying to focus on is all of the ability contained within people, really. Particularly people with disabilities, though, is a little bit of our focus here, and the human condition that encounters people with disabilities. One of the things that I want to talk a lot about is disability employment. Now, there's other aspects that I hope to discuss as well that impact the human condition and people with disabilities, but I do want to try to keep those related to employment as well. One of my foundational beliefs as a person with a disability myself, somebody who's been through these programs, and the father of a daughter of a person with a very significant disability, both my brothers, my sister, my whole family is people with disabilities. So bringing the prerogative of a person myself, and like I just mentioned, father and brother, I know that disability, by its definition, brings challenges, right? And what can we do to overcome those challenges? That's what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in what people can't do. I'm interested in what they can do. You can't have disability without first having ability, right? So that's what I choose to focus on. I'm a positive person. So with that, let's begin. We'll get right into it. So again, I really believe that employment can help bring independence and self-determination for people with disabilities. Why do I believe that? The data indicates that. And I know we're going to have some slides coming up throughout the series here, but really it's supported very well that people with disabilities that become employed have more independence and self-determination. They have a much higher ceiling in the labor market in terms of the compensation that they can get. But then they also have the dignity of their work product means something, right? If you're in the supermarket and you happen to see somebody, right, and you're a person without a disability, invariably, if you strike up a conversation with somebody in the frozen food aisle or whatever, I'd be willing to bet one of the first things out of your mouth is going to be, well, so what do you do? And they're going to ask you, so what do you do? Well, if you're a person with a disability and you're not in the labor force, you're going to start talking about your disability. And while that's all well and good, that's not really independence and self-determination, I think, as most people hope to aspire here in America. And the American dream, we hope to be upwardly mobile. We hope to achieve things, not only for ourselves, but for society. So in order to do that, if you're employed, the likelihood of being able to accomplish those goals are increased, and they're increased significantly. Unfortunately, we do have a long-term labor force challenge, though, for people with disabilities. Are you aware that nearly 2/3 of all working age people with disabilities are not in the labor force? That's right, they're not in the labor force. If you're unemployed, at least you are in the labor force. But this group of people is not even in the labor force. That is a real societal challenge that we have, not only for the people with disabilities, but for the rest of our society. There is tremendous talent contained within that group of individuals that right now is on the sidelines. We got to get them back in. So that's challenge number one. How do we get people resolved to want to work, to want to be in the labor force? And then number two, once they've resolved to be in the labor force, how do we get them employed? Well, many of the programs set up are geared towards step two, challenge two. And that's well and good. And those programs, we can talk about how well they work and how targeted they are and things like that. But really, I believe that we need to solve challenge one before we can move to challenge two. And again, that is bringing people into the labor force. So the labor force participation rate, since we've been tracking it for people with disabilities, which the first year we started keeping that data specifically for people with disabilities was 2008. So think about it. We really only have 15 years of data to go by here. It's still kind of new, okay? So we want to make sure that we're including everybody in this. So which definitions are we using? I'd like to talk about that for a second. Are you aware that in U.S. federal code, there's 67 different definitions of disability. That's right, 67 different definitions. Now, some of them are very well intended and they have a specific purpose. So I'm not advocating let's do away with all of these and have one definition. No, it's probably appropriate to have multiple definitions, but it's important for you to understand that there are multiple definitions and for multiple reasons. For example, the definition of Social Security, that Social Security used for disability, is meant to determine about employment and things like that. They ask questions specifically about what we were just talking about, the labor force and, working and things like that, versus the data that people like to use when they talk about 12.5% of the population as people with disabilities. Well, that 12.5%, that definition is relative to the ADA definition, which, oh, by the way, that's a little bit different than is measured in the question they ask in the American Community Survey. So you can see quickly that many of these policy issues are very nuanced. They have very specific detail. So oftentimes, if you're on social media and you're a disability advocate and you're interested in disability issues, you'll see people throwing data around and things like that. I want you to always ask yourself, well, which people with disabilities are we speaking of? Because depending upon which definition of disability you're using is really going to indicate which specific cohort of people with disabilities that we're talking about. Again, when we talk about disability employment in America, there's around 45 million people with disabilities, somewhere around there, 44.5 million to maybe 45.5 million, okay, with the margin of error and things like that. Now, of that 45 million, there's about 21 million that are working age people with disabilities, okay? And then of that, about 15 million of those people, so 15 million out of the 21 million, are not in the labor force. How do we know that? We know that by the definition, number one, and looking at the Social Security data, but we also then can match that to the American Community Survey data and the current population survey data, all which measure different things. The American Community Survey definition is put out by the Census Bureau. That's the census information that's gathered on a large basis. That's the largest metric. Whereas the current population survey is a very specific figure used by the Labor Department to calculate things like the labor participation rate and the unemployment rate, okay? So I guess the point is these three sources all are in basic agreement here. So we feel really confident about these numbers. When I say we, I mean, really it's the labor market economists and all of the people that do such a great job in putting all this data together. So again, back to our thing. If there's 21.5 million working age people with disabilities, okay, of that, there's 15 million of them that are not in the labor force. Again, you can't say unemployed because to be unemployed, you're in the labor force, all right? So there's another 2 million, or it's actually, I'm looking at the number here, it's actually lower than that. It's 1,100,000 individuals who are working age people with disabilities that are unemployed. So when you add those two numbers together, that's where you get approximately 70% of all working age people with disabilities not employed. Again, not unemployed, because unemployed means you're in the labor force. 70% of all working age people with disabilities not employed. That keeps me up at night. That is a crisis for America. We need to address this, not only for the people in that pool and giving them access to opportunities so that they can fulfill their independence and self-determination, but for America, for society. Out of that 70%, which, by the way, is like 16 million people, there is real talent there. There is real ability there. They might be people with disabilities, but they have ability. Somebody there has the next great invention or piece of art or something. They've got stuff to give. Well, if they're not even in the labor force, how are we going to get at that? Right? So that's one of the things that I'm passionate about. These are some of the issues we're going to be talking about here. So I'm fired up. Let's go. This is David D'Arcangelo. Stay tuned. We're going to have more episodes coming your way. For more information about disability employment issues, please visit our website, disabilityemploymentsolutions.com. The Save As Ability podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel at Disability Policy Expert, or wherever you stream your podcasts. Subscribe, stream, rate, and review our shows. Your ratings and reviews help our show reach new audiences. Produced by Pod Pro Entertainment. Save As Ability lives within a network of podcasts located at podproentertainment.com. #The New Radio. Again, my name is David D'Arcangelo, and I'm your disability policy expert. Until next time, thank you. I hope you have a great day.